voice. Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. Welcome to our British Computer Society session on social care, digital leaders, professionalism, and the role of the BCS. My name is Tommy. I am the social care lead for the BCS, and I run the social care community of practice. And I have cherry-picked some people who I think are very wise, very interesting, very intellectual, and have a lot to say about the topic of DDaT, digital data and technology in social care. So we all have a series of either SOCITM or BCS members on the panel, and I'm really keen to hear their voices. So I'll let them introduce themselves individually, and then we'll get started with our day. So Rav, would you like to go first for me, please?
Hi, everybody. My name is Rav Sekon. I'm the Operations Director for a supported living service, and we are called Balance Care.
Thank you, Rav. Mark, you're next on my screen. Would you go next for me, please?
Hi, everybody. Mark Nicholas. I'm a Deputy Director for Platforms and Services in the Transformation Directorate at NHS England. So my day job is totally about health IT, but I'm also the social care lead for the organisation, the Chief Social Worker.
Brilliant, Mark. Thank you. Sam?
Hi, so I'm Sam Smith and I'm the Director of Institute at SOCITM. And SOCITM is the Society of Innovation, Technology and Modernisation. And we work across the local public sector, so it's local government, but other organisations as well, including third sector and blue light and other organisations. And our aim is to support our members and the sector in any way we can from a digital data and technology perspective.
And finally, Katie.
Thanks, Tommy. Hi, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Katie Thorne. I'm the projects lead for the Digital Care Hub. We're an organisation which provides free support to adult social care providers, so care homes, home care, supported living, on anything to do with technology, data protection and cybersecurity.
Marvellous. So I deliberately chose my esteemed colleagues because I wanted to get a real breadth and depth across the sector. So we've got care providers as well as local authority and NHS, previously local authority, and children's social care connect us together because the patchwork and makeup of social care, particularly adult social care, is very different, and it's not one thing, and so it's quite different. So my first question is, actually, I just wanted to introduce the idea of why we wanted to talk about digital data and technology and what those roles might look like in social care, then do a section on what does that look like, what do you think could happen, and then finally, and then now, what are we doing now, what does it look like, and think about the future. So we've got four sort of areas to look at: why, what, now, and the future. So firstly, why? So Rav, can I come to you first? Why would an organization like Balance Care think about a digital data and technology type role? And would you also give us a sense as to what supported living is for those on the call who don't know what supported living is?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Tommy. Apologies in advance, I've got a sore throat, so if you can hear it fading off.
Oh, sorry, mate.
It's so good. So we are Balance Care, a supported living provider. Just to let people know what that means. So we support people, vulnerable adults typically, in their own homes with perhaps mental health diagnoses or physical health diagnoses. It's a broad spectrum of typically vulnerable people, perhaps with complex care needs, that we support in their own homes. That can range from maybe supporting someone for 4 hours a day up to perhaps 24/7 wraparound support with 2 staff members present at all times. And we kind of specialize in that end of the spectrum, really. So we do that in the Northwest, and it's going in the right direction, which is great. And in terms of the, I guess, digital transformation.
Yeah, give us a sense as to your journey on that one.
Yeah, so we're actually partway through it. I think we started approximately 2 years ago now. And there's a real demand for us as a social care provider. Oh, Liz can't hear very well. Can everyone else hear me? Or maybe it's the settings on Liz.
Yeah, fine. I'm not sure if there's an internal issue, Liz, sorry.
Might be the volume, Liz, possibly. So we're partway through our digital transformation journey. Okay, thank you. Which is a challenge, but an essential challenge, because I think for a long time, you know, care has been paper-based. The actual recording of data, the analysis of data, sharing info. Thanks, Mark. And such methods are outdated. They lead to perhaps slow methods of work practice, and also perhaps not as good quality care outcomes that we could achieve with the integration of digital. So digital helps improve care quality outcomes. So we're seeing true value in it, but it's a real challenge, I think, right now in terms of integrating digital into social care, because as a sector, it's so foreign to many people in the sector, which I think, you know, really needs to change.
Great. And I think that kind of comes into the point of professionalism that we'll come to later on. So that was really helpful. Thanks, Rav. And if I can turn to you, Sam and Mark, from a SOCITM perspective, from a previously local authority perspective, Sam, and Mark as an NHS social worker with sort of social care informatics in your job title, why should we bother talking about digital data and technology roles in the sector? So what?
So, Mark, I'm kind of happy to dive into that one. So just by way of a little bit of background for me. So I started my professional life working for a council, local government council, in a department which supported social workers in working with and dealing with a social services information database called SID, as it was, long time ago. And I was very, very informed by that role and how much technology was, how much social workers, particularly at the time, struggled with technology and the role of technology in their work. And that challenge hasn't changed as much as we might have hoped. But what has changed over that time, and the why I think that it's important, is that throughout that time, technology has become embedded in everything that we do from a working perspective, you know, certainly within councils and within large organisations. So from the social care staff point of view, in terms of councils and those groupings, technology is embedded into everything. Being able to deliver the role of a social worker without being involved with technology isn't now possible in a way that it might have been previously. Now, clearly, there's other roles within the profession, within the different kind of circumstances where technology isn't as present, but that progression is happening there also, and it's becoming more and more a part of everybody's life, commercially, from a consumer perspective, and also professionally as well. So that for me, the why is, it's here, it's with us, it's ingrained and embedding in our lives. So we need to make sure that our professionals and our communities can use it to best effect.
Great answer.
Yeah,
and Mark, what would you say?
Yeah, I completely agree with what Sam said there. It's here now. I mean, I've been working in this area for 10 years now, and you know, my role as social care lead spans both the local authority and the private voluntary sector of social care. But 10 years ago, we weren't in the same position as we are now. You know, we were thinking about digitization. We kind of dipped a toe in the water as a sector, but now, yeah, it's here, and you can't do your jobs without it, really. So, you know, in terms of what it means to an individual citizen or patient, you know, I'm kind of living this at the moment with my in-laws who are using digital tech to help them stay at home for longer and be safe in that environment. You know, so that digital technology is helping people to be able to live fuller and more productive and happier lives for longer before they might have a need for care services or health services or whatever. But then who's deciding what the best technology is? Who's advising those people? And it is an open market, and you know, we can all, you know, with our elderly loved ones, we can just buy stuff off the internet that we think might fit the bill. But there's a need to have some expertise within the professionals who are working in the sector, so that they can advise people on what the best technology is, how safe it is, you know, what happens to their personal information, all of that kind of stuff, And, you know, that's part of a social work or an occupational therapy assessment, isn't it? That, you know, as well as the bath rail, you need to be also advising people on the other forms of support for them at home or in whatever environment that they're in. So, you know, there's a real day-to-day need for us to have the skills and expertise to be able to do our job as social workers or as other social care professionals with the people that we work with.
Great answer. So the three of you have sort of reflected on the fact that if it's supported living and it's someone's own home, and that world where care meets technology with someone with complex needs, that's a rapidly moving space, Rav, and depending on the maturity of the organization, having someone digitally literate or more digitally literate people in the team makes sense. And then both Sam and Mark, that clear sense of it's here, we need to steer the conversation. It gives a very clear sense as to why roles like that need to exist. So if we move to the what, Katie, if I may, from your perspective, you work a lot with organizations across the country who are doing a great deal in this space. What's your reflection or your experience of organizations who put such a role in place? What does it do?
Yeah, so it's a really interesting question. I sort of get to work with a really large range of different organizations. So some people who provide care in the community, some people residential care, some very large organizations who work nationally, and then some very small organizations, fewer than 10 members of staff. So it looks very different in different places. I think my key reflection here is that previously, you know, if you're talking sort of 10, 15 years or so ago, and you were talking about digital and data roles, you were talking very much about sort of a formal IT role, possibly quite separate from frontline care. You might have an IT department who manage that, or you'd have an external IT support if you were using digital at all. Whereas now, when we talk to organizations, it's something which is very much seen as embedded as part of people's roles, particularly frontline sort of care. We see a lot more push around sort of digital champions, so sort of democratizing almost who has responsibility around technology. And if I'm thinking sort of particularly in sort of care home settings, that's been something which is really important. We have quite a flat hierarchical structure, generally speaking. You might have a owner, nominated individual, registered manager, and then an admin team. There's a lot of pressure on that registered manager to be all things to all people. And so actually to then say who in your organization has an interest in technology, could be upskilled in technology, could be a champion there to provide that support, actually means that you get a kind of cultural embedding of digital across an organization, rather than it just being, oh, we need to go speak to this one person who's really good at tech and burns out because they're having to answer all of the questions. So I think that's really, really shifted when I sort of think about how tech's happening across the sector. And I think the questions which people are asked are really changing. There's been really some interesting things in the chat about sort of the ethics and having those conversations with people. More and more people who are using care and support services are coming with their own technology. Younger people who are in the workforce are entering the workforce expecting technology to be part of their roles. We're having to have those conversations day to day. And I think that's been a real shift.
That is such a great answer. I love the idea of democratizing it and it being a bottleneck in terms of structures, which is a concept related to digital data and technology that I've never really made before, or doesn't come out so much. So yeah, that's a really good point. Thank you, Katie. If I may, as panelists, I sent you, this isn't homework and a test, by the way, so don't worry. Your dog can eat your homework, Sam, if you're you can use that excuse. So the FedIP, so the Federation for Informatics Professionals, of which SOCITM and BCS is part of, have a set of stated job roles in which digital data and technology can sit. So I'd be really interested to get you as panelists' reflections on those job roles, and how on earth do we translate those job roles into social care as people who are enacting them now? What are your initial reflections on that? Mark, if I can go to you first, and then Sam.
Yeah, I think I might have been involved in putting those job roles together, actually. So I think maybe there needs to be a common core, doesn't there, especially across health and social care. There needs to be a common core of skills, because the caring tasks and the overall caring task has some commonalities across the area. So there should be a basis to those job roles which can be common across health and social care. And then there should be some specific areas which I think recognise the levels of development within the different sectors. And, you know, with the greatest of respect to my colleagues who've all been involved in this within social care, we're not quite as advanced in terms of those roles in social care as we are in health service. So, you know, the levels of expertise and the numbers of people with those skills are not as great as they are in the health service. So, you know, having really, really niche specialisms within the job roles, I don't think is a particularly good idea for social care at the moment, because what we need to have is that grounding of those core skills, and we need to be able to then roll out those skills to the greatest number of people. Now, things that are helping with that is the fantastic work that's been done by Katie and by the Digitising Social Care programme in rolling out digital care records to the care provider sector. You know, we're on target to meet an 80% of the sector with a digital care record by March this year. So without the capability within the sector, driving digital skills forward is redundant, isn't it? You know, but once we're in a position like we are now, where the vast majority of the sector is digitized, then acquiring those digital skills also acquires a purpose, doesn't it? So I think certainly within the care provider sector, we're at that point now. And I think there's been an increasing recognition from social work profession as well, which was tricky at first, but now an increasing recognition from social work as a profession that this is something that social workers need to know about and have that expertise on. I think the ways of being able to kind of drive forward adoption are through, you know, like I said, in the care provider sector, having digital care records across the majority of the sector, perhaps looking at career pathways, of which one might be a digital or data expert. I think in social work, making sure that it's a key part of the competency framework, which I know that BASWA have done some work on, and making sure that, you know, all new social workers that are qualifying have had the opportunity to explore some of these issues, like people have mentioned in the chat about AI, about privacy, about ethical use of technology, but also about the benefits of technology and how that can really help with the key social work tasks.
Great answer. Thank you, Mark. So if we can come to Sam and then to Rav on that question. Sam, from a SOCITM perspective and your previous hat with the local authority perspective, what's your view or your ongoing interpretation of that database that you see?
So my overriding view when I see that kind of list of job families is I think they're great from an IT and digital perspective. And I think they're absolutely foreign from a social work and a social care perspective. So that there is a bit of oil and water there, I think, for me, because if I look at some of the examples, they're just never, in my experience, certainly, the social care staff from a local authority perspective would expect the IT service to have those roles and to be those things. Where I think the Mark has spoken already, and I completely agree, is around skills. So I don't know that it's as much around job families from a social care perspective necessarily as it is around skills. I think there's the role of how IT and digital services within councils supports social care staff to do what they need to do is an important one. But I wouldn't expect, for example, social care roles of data scientist or change and release manager or security architect. I struggled to see any roles where they would sit within social care themselves. They would pull from the IT services is what is my view of those job families. But building the use and understanding and confidence of technology into the roles that they undertake. That absolutely, I agree with Mark in that, and increasing the adoption and understanding that as a profession, digital stuff is part of their role, because as we've said, it's become an inherent part of delivering the role.
Absolutely. I love that line. It's not about job families, but about skills. That's a really helpful distinction to make. So there was a comment that Karen had made, and I thought, Rav, it would be interesting to get your views. So she said, I find it hard to see how any of the job families sit for care providers. So if you look at those job descriptions, what's your immediate reflection as a nominated individual and, living it large in the supported living setting?
Sure. I think a similar one, actually, a similar reaction. The roles noted are so foreign to typical day-to-day of social health and social care delivery, and when we look at them, they wouldn't fit into currently what we do. So therefore, it does demand that we look at the fundamentals of how is a care provider set up, what is the governance structure that we require to deliver. And it's evident that there's a huge gap when it comes to IT and digital. And we could say, oh, we've got an IT manager, but that person cannot serve the functions that are required to lead social care into the digital age. So I think, resonating with Katie's comments, we have digital champions that can fill the gap to an extent and to create that culture of digital, which is really positive. But it's evident that there are big gaps that we as providers need to be funded for to be able to fill.
Yes.
Because if I was to go to the shareholder and say, yeah, great, we can create this hierarchy, and we're gonna smash it, and we're gonna take balanced care digital, the response would be, where's the funding coming from? So that's a real big challenge, I think, for care providers who are already trying to make ends meet really with the current government changes, etc. and labour costs.
Can I come on that, Tommy? Sorry. And I absolutely agree with Raf. And I think that's the pay funding element is really important here if we're going to start thinking about sort of digital roles across especially frontline social care providers. It's not enough to sort of just provide digital skills training to people in the workforce. I really agree with Mark. I think career pathways is something we should be exploring within the sector. But as part of that, people are going to expect, commensurate pay increases if it's adding additional qualifications onto their role. I think it's going to be, in the current funding climate, really problematic for us to ever be able to attract people from the IT profession into social care. Well, some people may wish to do it. The majority are going to go to tech companies where you can get paid significantly more than working for, especially a charitable organisation, for example. So we need to think about how we can kind of look at our own workforce, look at upskilling, reskilling people, but making sure they get the qualifications and the pay recognition that they need to take on those roles.
Well, that's a great answer, because my next question to the four of you was going to be about professionalism. So within the idea of digital data and technology, as I read it, it's a well-established government phraseology, as it were, and we have these job profiles that are well established within FedIP. And between the four of you, you've brought out themes such as career pathways, Mark, and you said, Sam, it's not about job families, it's about skills. And Rav, the labels don't fit in terms of what we deliver, nor could I go to my shareholders, stakeholders, board of trustees, whoever, to say, oh, where's the money to provide it? And Katie, how do you attract from the IT profession to bring them in? If professionalism is part of the nub of the attractiveness of the role, what does professionalism of digital data and technology as a role look like for the sector, whether you're a local authority or a care provider? Any thoughts?
I think that we definitely need to focus on the clinical informatics roles. So, I've
Could you explain a bit more, Mark? What do you mean?
Yeah, I've worked for the NHS for so long that I've started using the C word. So so clinical informatics roles are a kind of phrase that's used within the NHS to mean informatics roles where the person concerned has both the kind of technical expertise or even qualifications, but also the clinical expertise and qualifications as well. Within that, social work is included, occupational therapy is included, nurse managers of care homes would be included, and we're lobbying to try to include registered managers in that as well, to make sure that it's representative. So we definitely need those people, because they're the people who are using or should be using digital in a frontline context. I think a lot of the other DDaT roles are really important as well. And I love the suggestion in the chat about, perhaps where there's a need for those more specialized roles, using them as a shared resource. I think somebody mentioned a data scientist, using a data scientist between different local authorities as a shared resource. And I certainly think there's the opportunity among care providers to be able to look at developing that kind of informatics shared resource as well. So I think focusing on the clinical informatician and developing that role in social care, for me, is the main part, not necessarily the only part, though.
Yeah, and actually Claire had put in the chat around the really interesting model in Northern Ireland. So I have had 2 or 3 conversations with Michael Mulholland, who is the social work information officer for Northern Ireland, and their rollout of EPIC and Eclipse, which integrates NHS and local authority data, around the idea of professionalism and the role of a sort of digital data and technologist as someone who's also a professional in social care, as opposed to a health model of care as a social model of care. So I think it's really interesting. But then Sam and then Katie, if I can come to you two, if we say professionalism, what does that mean for you, Sam? What does that look like?
So for me, it is about having, as I've mentioned already, having the kind of the digital skills and accountability and use and responsibility for those elements baked into the professional roles. So I'll take an example of if a social care worker was to input something on paper, they would check that was correct. So it's having the same degree of professionalism around a digital record, and an understanding that digital record is as important as any paper record may have been in the past from a different way of working. So, and in the past, certainly my experience, has been quite a lot of social care workers who have devolved or that responsibility for updating the digital records to others, and therefore there's the opportunity for mistakes to creep in, and for fundamentally for a lack of ownership of that digital record in whatever kind of form it takes. And it's interesting, actually, when we've already mentioned in the chat around AI, that's coming through as another level of challenge for social workers and social care staff. So the ability for technology to make things easier, quicker, more streamlined, but the sign off of whatever is produced or however that tool is used still being an absolutely critical part of the professional role. So I think for me, that professionalizing of it isn't necessarily saying that social care staff have got to have all of this experience and all of this technical ability. But I think there's some really interesting kind of discussions in the chat about how you can group together some of those skills and provide them, in a cost-effective way. But it is fundamentally about accepting that as part of the profession is to use the tools and the technology and to own the outputs of whatever they are, be it entering information into a digital record manually or using the outputs of an AI tool or some other form of assistant to do it for you. It's all about making sure that the ownership and the accountability and the sign-off is there, for me anyway. That's really, really important part of it.
That's a great answer. Thank you. Katie, what would you say?
Yeah, it's a great answer. And as usual, I agree with Sam on that. I guess from sort of a care worker perspective, this for me ties into sort of a broader conversation about the professionalization of the broader social care sector, sort of outside of regulated roles. So I don't necessarily see it being sort of a requirement to professionalize just from a technology perspective, but there is still a lot of perception from a care worker perspective or a registered manager that you're actually not a professional, you're just a care worker. And I think that's a broader problem. It's something we can tackle with technology, digital data roles a little bit, but it's sort of a broader concern. If you look at things like the care certificate, right, for care workers, is very little at the moment in it around technology. So I think there are some simple things we could do talking about digital and data around updating that and sort of having some core capabilities around digital in the sector. And I think also there has been, somebody mentioned in the chat, and I now can't find it to remember the name. There are people already in digital roles in frontline care provision. They exist. Sorry, I didn't mean to invalidate you. I know you do. So I wonder as well if there's more around professional networks that we can create for people who are in these roles outside of the NHS and local authorities as well, to sort of share expertise and experience. And I think that will help as well in terms of creating those professional networks.
Yes. What a great point. And actually, when I've looked back at the notes that I've made from this little section from the four of you reflecting the professionalism angle, it feels like you're talking about a national care service, really. Why wouldn't you have any of those elements within a national care service? So the idea of a digital data and technologist being something that is actually quite pertinent to a national care service for whomever a national care service is applicable. But it would be remiss to not think about a national care service and not think about digital data and technologists. I'm not suggesting they are the same thing, but there's certainly an overlap. That was really, really helpful. So if we could move on to the section that I've titled Now. So Rav, could I come to you first? And you alluded to it at the beginning. Can you give us a sense as to now, having more digital data and technology dedicated type roles, what does it bring to Balance Care, having a role like yourselves and others in your team?
It can bring great value because there is such a huge gap. You know, I think over the last few years, any form of digital support for care providers was welcomed. And I think that's a general summary, really. It's been a huge change for care providers, so any support is welcomed warmly. And we've appointed digital champions and employed somebody to support with our digital transformation, which has been very helpful. They've kind of guided the process, but I still think there's a large gap to be filled, not only in Balance Care, but I think for care providers within the networks that I'm in and speak to other RMs, NIs, other professionals in the teams. People are kind of on the journey, but they're struggling to meet their goal. And I think it's a real challenge for care providers to continue that direction. And you know, there was helpful funding provided by Digital Social Care initially to start off that process. But I think what a lot of providers are now seeing is, how do I sustain this? How can I sustain this change permanently for long-term change? Because the initial steps are there, but it's now projecting forwards if people haven't been able to because of limitations that exist, particularly in social care. So we're seeing benefit, but there's still a lot more work to be done to kind of reap the true rewards long term.
So it's not a short-term stopgap. This is a long-term.
Exactly. It's kind of revolutionizing how we work as a sector, which is huge, and it will take time. So there's no expectation that it'll happen quickly, but we just need to kind of maintain that direction and have the kind of right inputs to allow that change to happen, which I feel is where we are right now in social care. It's a challenge to maintain that direction and achieve our goals.
So taking that phrase that you used, such as revolutionizing work, which makes a lot of sense to those of us who are in this world and au fait with it as well. Katie, if I could come to you and then to Mark. So Katie, what would be your observation of an organization that has digital data and technologist type roles? What's the output? What does it look like? What are they bringing to the table?
I think Rav is completely right. You see that then leads to really transformational changes within an organization, which are embedded in the long term. Quite often when we see people bringing in new technology into an organization, if you don't have that ongoing support, the tech sort of works for a while and then, you know, project manager disappears off, or the person responsible for that leaves, and sort of it all fizzles out and people go back to old ways of working. it's not a tech problem. We have quite a lot of issues with cultural change around especially major digital transformation projects. If you're suddenly bringing in a care record system, even if you're a small organization, that's a huge transformation. So having people with DDaT roles can help with that cultural change that we see. I think also where it's done really well, it really improves dialogue between not only sort of individual members of staff and staff teams, but also with people who use care and support services and with their families. So it's a conversation not just with, what would be easiest for us in management. I used to work in a nursing home operationally, right? Like it was easy for us to decide, this piece of tech is going to make my life in operations much easier. But what does that mean for frontline staff? What does that mean for people we're supporting? I think if you have people who are thinking about that all the time as part of their job, you can make sure that tech can work for everybody. And we're really starting to see that now.
So it's almost as if the digital data and technologist type role is someone who critiques the tech rather than just saying blindly, it works for me, great, but it holds it to account a bit more. Is that a fair comment?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. It's a great example of this. So I work in the technology space, but I don't think that technology is always the right solution for every problem. So I was talking to a care provider out in the States, and they were supporting somebody who was living with dementia, has some quite challenging behavior, but when he had been worked as a tractor engineer, right? And this company they had quite a lot of funds. It was over in the States, and they're very excited. They built a digital system to create a tractor engine virtually, which this chap could, then go and they taught him how to use a tablet to go repair the virtual tractor engine. And it did have some good results, but costed a huge amount of money, took a lot of staff time with setting everything up. And I was like, okay, but why didn't you just go and get a not working engine? You've got loads of space. You could risk assess for that. It'd be safe. It would have been something, that you'd have the same outputs, but you don't have to spend all of that money. So having somebody who can kind of sit and talk and have those conversations with people can really advocate for people who can't necessarily advocate for themselves, I think it's going to be really important. Else we're just going to jump to the shiny and new and quite often very expensive, as opposed to what's most practical.
Yeah, good point. Before I come to you, Mark, that reminds me, Katie, of during the COVID pandemic when you'd have startups speculating in social care who would say, we're thinking of building a big telephone for people with dementia. And we'd say, you mean an iPad?
Cannot tell you the number of bad iPad rip-offs that I've seen, Tommy.
Yeah. Anyway, that's also reminded me. Mark, so when we think, taking Rav's comment around revolutionizing work and then critiquing the technology, from your sense, what's your observation as to social workers contending with technology in an interesting way right now?
Yeah, well, I think we're at the tip of the iceberg, really, in terms of that, and I think that there's a potential to go a lot deeper. So, I talked earlier on about how with technology, who are the people who are the experts who are advising this huge number of people who might be eligible for an assessment of their social care needs, but who may or may not receive one. And even if they do receive one, they're likely to be spending their own money on that technology rather than that be coming from the local authority. And, I think, social workers and occupational therapists need to be central to that. But they also need to understand about the safety of those products. They need to understand about information governance in relation to those products, offshoring potentially that information. They need to be able to understand how, I'll call it a business process, which is a kind of organizational term, but in relation to how that person lives their life and what they do, how that technology would fit into that. And all of those things require a significant amount of expertise if that professional is going to be able to do their job properly. I would also say that, in terms of support and commissioning roles within an organisation, which could be a local authority, could be a sort of medium to large care provider, having people who understand about what various different forms of technology will do at the front line and how they will be used, how they will be misused by people as well. That's really important. And of course, we need these professionals, these clinical professionals, to be embedded within the suppliers as well. I mean, one of the things that I've banged on about for the last 10 years is about how the systems that we use, certainly as social workers, have been dictated by how it's best to put them together technically, and not how it would be best to approach them professionally. So we have lots of social workers who will complain about the systems that they use, and that's because they've not been designed to a large extent around social work and their users, their clients' needs. So we need these professionals to be embedded within suppliers as well, and to be involved in the process of being able to develop new technology, new products that can then be used for providing better quality care to individuals who have a need for care.
That's a really interesting point about the idea of a sort of technical and professional specialist moving into the supplier space. That's a really interesting model and idea. Sam, any thoughts on that? So obviously a lot of your members are local authorities. Have you seen any examples now of positive change that's occurring with local authorities having clear digital data and technology type roles or specific dedicated roles?
So I think what we're seeing more is data roles coming through. So I think that's one of the areas. So if you think about it from a technical perspective, quite often that, as I said, the actual delivery of the systems is done by the IT teams in the councils. But what we do see coming through is data roles and also systems roles. So roles that understand how the systems work and how they are configured and how they can best support the people that need to use them effectively. So there's definitely a growing understanding of the power of data. We're seeing some really, really good work with tools like Power BI and Tableau to bring dashboards and to facilitate and support the decision making in councils about who needs to get what, how things are progressed and what the overall performance of the service is looking like. So I think really you're starting to see data come through there, but it's not coming through, as far as I'm seeing it, in a structured way. What you're seeing is data, people who have roles around data, either data analysts or some other role, who happen to work within the social care service. And sometimes they're really fully integrated in with the wider IT or the wider data team, and sometimes they're not. Sometimes they sit in isolation. So it's progressing, but it hasn't matured, I would say, yet. But there is absolutely a greater understanding of the need and the power and influence of data, and that's a whole conversation of itself, really. And AI does plug into that. It's really interesting seeing Jonathan's comment around kind of integrating AI into those kind of legacy systems, and there's lots happening in that space at the moment. So and in itself, that then surfaces up the need for the data to be curated and safe and reliable as much as anything. So yeah, certainly seeing the integration of some of the core skills from a DDaT perspective into social care, but I think within councils there will remain that divide between the provision of the IT and the systems / the data work that sits within the services sometimes.
Thank you, Sam. So before we come to our last section on the future, it feels like nobody is saying they shouldn't do it. No one is saying it's a bad idea. It's that in social care the lens looks different.
Yeah, I would say
the output looks different because it reflects the diversity of the sector. And it's interesting how data is the element that you're drawing out there, Sam, which is such a powerful tool for the sector. And wouldn't it be interesting if you had more data to articulate the value of social care to society as a whole? So as we come to our last section on the future, and then hopefully some time for Q&A, I want to ask the three of you the same questions to see what your answers are to it. So I've got 3 questions for you, and it'd be interesting to get your reflections on those. So if you could imagine or reimagine a digital data and technologist type role in 5 years, what would it look like? And then secondly, to the BCS, to FedIP, to SOCITM, as membership bodies of this world, bearing in mind what you've said thus far, what value, what should they be doing more of in this space for people who work in social care? And then thirdly is, let's say you had the ear of a very influential minister, and I know there's not all people from England here, but could be Northern Ireland, could be Wales, could be Scotland. What would you say about professionalism, digital data and technology, and social care roles? So anyone can pick any of those 3 questions, conscious of time. So I'll go for Ralph first.
Okay, thank you, Tommy. So quickly, I think if I go with the first question, I'm going to dream big here, Tommy. I'm going to dream
Please
big.
do dream big.
Yeah.
Take us on your journey.
So I close my eyes. So, I think what would be really helpful, and to resonate with all the comments shared today, really, is digital leadership roles that not only bring the data into social care, but also perhaps the clinical aspect, the social care aspect, that are truly embedded not only with local authorities, perhaps in the NHS, the ICB, almost a network of digital leadership roles that will translate into care providers progressing on that journey of digital transformation. Because at the moment that doesn't exist, and we're kind of finding our own way, sometimes in isolation. But I think that would be a true ideal for that to exist, to enable this change further with the integration of the DDaT job profiles as well. That would require comprehensive training programs with clear pathways to enable that change, and to connect as well a standardization across the sector in terms of consistency and efficacy. What is the acceptable professional standard that we are striving for? That would be brilliant to see, because that would be a clear direction for all then. But at the moment, kind of like, we're all finding our own way with it, which is inconsistent.
What a really good point. That leads to the professionalism, doesn't it? If you don't have professionalism, you have inconsistency. That's a really good point. Sam, what would you say?
I think that's just such a great answer, Rav. And I think that picking up on a lot of the points that we've discussed, that the standardization of the pathway, or the lack of the pathway as it stands at the minute, is such a huge challenge. So to be able to resolve that and have a framework that accounts for the diversity and the complexity of the sector, and has that granularity, that would just be fantastic. It really would.
Mark, what would you say to BCS, to FedIP, SOCITM, and other of the bodies in this area around their work in social care? What could they do better to support what is a ginormous sector engaging with technology?
I think before I said anything to them, I would say to the professionals, make the case for the need for these roles within your own workspace. Because I think that's really important. And unless we're kind of lobbying for that, I don't think we'll get to where we need to be. But yeah, what I would like to see in the future is parity. So we've got clearly defined roles. The team that I work in is the biggest employer of clinical informaticians in the country. We've got clearly defined roles in the NHS. We need to have those roles clearly defined within social care as well. They need to be transferable. So, if you're working in a care provider setting as a clinical informatician, then you should be able to transfer to a local authority setting, and vice versa. That creates career opportunities for people, which will help drive it. I think we need parity in terms of standards and regulation. So things like information standards. We need parity between health and social care regulation. The regulation of medical devices is quite strict, but some of the devices which are being used in social care, because they're being used in social care, are not regulated to the same standard. So I think we need to look at things like that. We also need to look at networks, I think, as well. And You know, there are some great networks for clinical informaticians in the health service, but we haven't quite got that connection with each other across social care. So in the future, I would really like to see thriving networks where we can all talk about these issues as clinical and informaticians working in social care. We can talk about how we want things to develop in the future. We can talk about problems and do problem solving together. And you can only do that if you've got some effective networks operating.
Thank you, Mark. Great answer. And Katie, so you bump into, well, I suppose for England, it would be Stephen Kinnock or Wes Streeting in a lift. What would you say to him about this topic, and any policymakers that might be listening or listen to the recording about this world? What would you say?
I get the easy question, right? I guess I would say you need to be thinking about sort of long-term sustainable funding for this space, not just one-off injections of capital funding, but actually looking about what that would be in the long term. I think if they are serious about a national care service, then you need to be thinking about what the digital architecture would look like for that and how that would represent local authority views, but also private, independent, not-for-profit care providers as well, and what that would look like. And sort of pick out Mark's comment there around networks. I think there's a real opportunity there. We've already seen quite a lot of success with local care associations representing their members, including very small organizations, bringing people into digital roles. So for those organizations who wouldn't have somebody embedded within it, there is a trusted person they can talk to who knows the sector well, who can advocate for their views. And in some ICB areas, which are a bit more advanced with their shared care records thinking, you're seeing sort of local care associations have an equal sit on boards alongside local authority colleagues, alongside the NHS, and you're actually going to have shared decision making, which is representative for all people. So I think you have opportunities here to sort of look at building some of that digital infrastructure and networking within social care, including those very small organisations, and I would hope they would think about that.
That is a great point. Thank you, Katie. It's remiss, isn't it, for us to talk about digital data and technology in social care and not link it to the National Care Service ambitions of government. That is a missed point. That's obviously a very English-centric problem for those of us on the call who are not in England, but nonetheless, that is really relevant. So I think that we have covered a great deal of ground. We have 6 minutes to go. If people have additional questions in the chat, please do add. I was struck by a comment Jerry made where you said that you've recently reviewed an adult social care strategy and it mentioned data once. I wonder, panelists, if you have a reflection on either for care workers, professionals like social workers, OTs or nurses or registered managers and beyond, how much training is there around how much training is there around data specifically that actually nurtures curiosity?
I'm not saying a lot, if I'm being completely honest, and I think it's something that the local government as a sector struggles with, let alone from a social care perspective. So you do get technical roles, you know, the data architects, the data scientists, and data analysts. But what I think is missing is overview training of data literacy, how to tell stories with data, but also how to understand and what to ask for from the data. So if you're not the person that's going to be doing the technical bit, what do you need to ask and what do you need to understand in order to be able to have the conversations with the people who are doing it, whether that's if in the case of the smaller providers, whether that's somebody else doing it for you or whether it's somebody who you're working with in the council. The comfort and capability and confidence to have those conversations with another person and understand what you need to get and how you can achieve it. I think that training, that's missing for me.
I think you make a very, very good point. So we have 4 minutes to go. So what I'm going to do is just summarize where we've got to and what we've covered in the time since we started at 12. So one of the first things we talked about was career pathways, which is a sort of theme that runs through every single point here, that it's not necessarily about job skills and am I a digital data and technology role as per the FEDI job description, but it's more about the skills that you enact within that. And that in 2025, it's impossible to have a functioning organization if you don't have digital data and technology focused roles, whether that's for your community, as Sam was alluding to, or operationally, as Rav was suggesting. But where is the funding for such roles, as Rav has pointed out? And then Katie said, how do we attract people from the IT profession who might be really gifted in this space, who might be interested in care? Because professionalism comes with pay. You can't have a professional digital data and technology type role if you don't have the money to pay for it, because it's about using technology and owning the outputs. That comes with a cost operationally, whether you're a statutory local authority or whether you're an independent care provider. The benefits of revolutionizing this work are really obvious, but the output of it is being critical and critiquing the tech, as opposed to blindly implementing it, using Katie's tractor analogy as one that comes to mind. And then Rav pointed out the professionalism helps with consistency. It's consistency in terms of the digital skills that you enact, but that also means data, as well as artificial intelligence and beyond. So the point being about artificial intelligence, I'm glad in some ways that we haven't been overrun by artificial intelligence in that, because that is just one part or one piece of a very large jigsaw that digital data and technologists look at. It's also about networks and how that we can utilize and connect those. And actually, for long-term vision for digital and data technologist type roles in social care, we need long-term sustainable funding. We have to think about the National Care Service that's in England and professionalism of digital within that. But actually, professionalism of digital data and technology needs a vision. It needs a workforce strategy, dare I say. It needs something that fits social care, as opposed to here's an NHS structure that with a health medical model of care, and perhaps you could social care-ize it. It needs a social care model, because social care is fundamentally a social model of care, not a medical model of care. And maybe that's the root of it all. So we come to 1 minute to go. I'd like to thank everybody for your contributions today. If this is something that interests you and you would like to join our social care community of practice in the BCS, I'm just going to put my email address in the chat. We have a community of practice that runs across the sector, and if you would like to join, I'd be really keen for you to join and to hear more from you. So I put my email in the chat. Please do get in touch. And I'd like to thank Rav with your dodgy voice, Mark, Sam with your barking dog, and Katie for supporting us with your wise words and commitment and time today. And thank you for a really, really enlightening and engaging session. Thank you, everybody.